Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm just waiting for Abhishek to come online. He is already there.
Hi.
Hi. Hello, Abhishek. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good and wonderful to meet you, even if it is virtually. I've
Yeah,
been
very
following
sad.
away.
I had hoped that we would get to meet in person at some point. And I'm sure we will, but I
Of
suppose,
course.
with coronavirus and everything, I'm just grateful that we have good internet feeds.
Yes, and thank you for coming here. Thank you for this wonderful book. So let me introduce this book first. This is Abhishek's new book, and as you can see, I've gone through it very thoroughly, and it's a wonderfully written book. And as I said in one of my promos, that I've roamed around the lanes and alleys of Shahjahanabad for the past 4 or 5 years. But with your book, I was introduced to the people there also.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I just know the people who live there currently, whom I've talked about in my books. So,
yeah.
a little bit about the book before I start a session with Abhishek. This book talks about the urban citizens of modern South Asia, not just as passive objects, but people who have political aspirations and people who have shaped the city itself. And again, another thing that I found very, very interesting, and that I found in another book, Abhishek, is that you start your book very interestingly in 1922. You don't
Hmm.
start it in the 17th or the 18th century. And you talk about, and then you take us to the Mughal Delhi. So you talk of lectures by Sir Jadunath Sarkar on Nadir Shah's invasion, and as seen in the context of the national movement and the internecine struggles that doomed Muhammad Shah's nobles and Gandhi's non-cooperation movement. Events
Hmm.
seen through the lens of past and present are always fascinating in the lessons they present. So, can you just take us through that and your how you?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, even before 1922, I think we have to go to the Delhi of the 1980s and 90s when I used to live there. Um, and for me, there's a sort of massive disjunction growing up in the city. On the one hand, sort of reading the history of the city in our CBSE textbooks, which sort of had a few lines on Delhi in the 17th and the 18th centuries. And then growing up in a city where you were profoundly aware of the deep political significance of the city as the national capital, and also the kind of political consciousness of everyday people that you met on the streets. Because everybody actually in Delhi has lots of political opinions that they're very happy to share with you. So I was trying to figure out how is it that, this is such a political city and people care so much about politics, and yet when it comes to the pre-modern period, we don't know anything about it. And I realized that there's a kind of blindness that we have towards this idea that people can be politically engaged or active subjects. I think that a lot of things that have happened in the last 20 years have shaken some of that idea for us. But in general, I think we have this idea that, the people, the awam out there is sort of, not particularly political. And this presupposition is a sort of interesting presupposition because in 1922, when Gandhiji is right in the middle of the non-cooperation movement, which is really the first major national agitation in the country of a certain scale and kind, it's very interesting to hear the greatest Mughal historian alive get up on stage at that time in the middle of the non-cooperation movement and say something like, well, look, let's talk about another Shah. Let's talk about something that happened in 1739.
Uh,
And the only, yes, sorry.
and I was just saying, I'm turning off the questions because
Okay.
it's apparently people are can't see your face, or maybe you can, Yes, I think that's it.
Let's see. Okay, let me
Ha
just
ha.
adjust this a little bit more. Okay.
I think that
Um,
that's fine. Ha.
yeah, and so why does Yadunath Sarkar decide that he wants to give lectures on Nadir Shah at Patna University in 1922? And his main point is to basically, I think, say that India, something happened in the 18th century, and as a result of that, India really cannot be free of British rule, and it should not be free of British rule, right? That the British, in a sense, have a kind of duty to continue to rule India. And one of those reasons is that because Indians are not capable of being united and ruling themselves. And he says that this is clear from Nadir Shah's invasion of Delhi, because how could a Persian warlord march all the way from Iran to Karnal, right, which is 80 kilometers from Delhi? How could he come so close and then defeat a larger Mughal army and then capture the Mughal capital and then kill the people in the city and then take away its treasures back to Iran? How could this be? Other than the fact that there was something truly rotten about the Mughal Empire by the 1720s and 30s. So that was really the question that set me thinking, is this really true? Could this really be the case? Well, but we also know that Nadir Shah killed a lot of people in Delhi, and until the 19th century, the Dilliwalas of the Purana Shahar, used the phrase Nadir Shah to describe a really big catastrophe. So there's a kind of like living memory of Nadir Shah for 150 years after he killed the people of Delhi in a Qatl-e-Aam, in a massive massacre. So why? Why did he do that? And that set me going. And the more I started to explore that, the more it became clear to me that actually there were reasons for it. That there was a kind of political sensibility that was shared by the people of the city that is not immediately apparent from the historical works that we consult.
Another point that you make is when you write that the Mughal, and that's something when you describe about Burhanul Mulk and Sadat Khan, and you are talking about who aligned with Nadir Shah and who aligned with the Mughal emperor, and you say here that while the Mughal elite had become indifferent to who sat on the peacock throne, the occupation of the Red Fort by a scion of the Timurid dynasty was central to the conception of just political order for the city's common folk. That again is a very, very interesting point that you've made. So can you just take us through that?
Yeah, and I think what the 1730s, by the 1730s, which is a time that we think of the end of the Mughal Empire.
Yes.
The Mughal Empire has been sort of around for 140 years, more or less. If you start from Akbar, let's say in 1518. And you can see that as a really short empire. So 140 years is not very long if you compare to, say, the dynasties of China that frequently go much longer, or the Ottoman Empire. But at the same time, you could argue that in our very fractious and divided country, to hold it together for 140 years is actually a massive achievement. The Republic of India, is only 70 years old. So the Mughals were already twice as successful, in a sense, right? And it'll be interesting to see if the Republic of India is around in 70 years. So what did the Mughals do that was right? So instead of asking the question, what did they do that was wrong, I'm much more interested in figuring out what was it that they managed to do that actually made them successful. Yeah. Right? And it seems to me a crucial element of their success was actually the support and the acquiescence of all kinds of ordinary people. Now, this is, of course, not at all to say anything about the fact that there is, that there are rebellions against Mughals. Of course, there are constant rebellions, and the Mughals are clearly brutal rulers when it comes to the countryside, when it comes to all kinds of matters of dealing with taxes and money. They're like other early modern states. They're violent, sanguinary, brutal. Yet, nevertheless, there is a philosophy and an ethics that undergirds Mughal rule. And that philosophy and ethics comes from a very sophisticated intellectual tradition that makes it really clear that there's only one reason for a king to exist. And the reason is justice. So kings exist to give justice to the people. And in India, uniquely, I think, perhaps anywhere on the surface of the globe, the Mughal emperor is expected to personally give justice to the people. So there's this idea that there's a kind of personal justice that the Mughal emperor makes available. And if you compare this to Japan or China or the Ottoman Empire or early modern Europe, nowhere else would this be the case. But I think actually this still remains in our political culture because people still say, I will go to the prime minister and ask for justice. So there is kind of a sense of this connection of ordinary people to highest political authority. And I think that in a sense, the people who create this are really the Mughals. So, there's an idea that the Mughal king is the pivot or the fulcrum for ordinary justice for everyone. And I think people are deeply attached to that idea. And I think we can see that because, people will show up at the Jharoka Darshan and say,
Yes.
Duhai, Duhai. Right? Yeah.
And even today we talk about Adle Jahangir and we talk about that bell, whether that existed or not, but we still talk about all that and how, and the stories of Jahangir and his Adl are so famous even today about that,
Absolutely.
the Dhobi and all those other stories. And I translated Dastan-e-Ghadar, in which there is an event mentioned under the heading of Badshah Ki Raiyat Parwari, where he gives
Hmm.
justice to the people, the butchers and the cowherds. And he says that, when the British are trying to throw them out of the city, that if you throw them out, then you have to throw me out also. And so,
Right.
as you said, that is, and this is in must be 1840s, 1850 is the time that this is set in. So even towards
Hmm.
the end of the Mughal Empire, we still see this sense of people coming on that under that Jharoka and asking for justice personally.
Absolutely. And Rana, as you know, when the mutiny breaks out in Delhi and the
Yes.
mutineers arrive from Meerut,
Uh,
the first place they actually go to is the
uh,
Jharoka Darshan,
uh,
right?
uh,
And they say, Duhai, Duhai,
uh,
we are here to get rid of the English and the
uh,
Christians
uh,
because these are people who are bent on destroying Hinduism and Islam,
uh,
and so you must leave.
uh,
So
Acid.
people, so I think that's a very significant fact that even as late as the 1850s,
Uh,
which is 150 years again after the Mughal Empire has ceased to be a really
uh,
effective political entity, ordinary people in the city of Delhi still believe that the Mughal emperor is personally the guardian of their political order and the provider of justice for them. And that's a sort of powerful political construction.
मुल्क बादशाह का हुकुम कंपनी की मुल्क बादशाह का so so that, yes, of course. And again, another thing that I found very interesting was when you are describing the slaughter by Nadir Shah, and you say that there were so many of the nobles who got personal indemnity and they had the Irani soldiers posted outside their house. So while there is a general Qatl-e-Aam going on in the city, these people are protected. So how did that happen? They went and made, you of course talk about it, but can you tell us how that
Yeah.
happened?
So again, I think I think that this is the kind of story that will be instinctively familiar and recognizable to anybody who's actually from Delhi,
Huh.
which is that when there's a big crisis, the elites are always protected, right? So the
Hmm.
elites never suffer. So it's not that shocking when you think about the fact that the most important financial administrator in the city of Delhi in the early 18th century is somebody called Raja Jugal Kishore.
Hmm.
And Raja Jugal Kishore lives on a massive mansion on
Hmm.
Chandni Chowk. In fact, there's still an alley that bears his name next to his old
Hmm.
mansion, which is right next to the old Kotwali. Raja Jugal Kishore, as Nadir Shah's troops arrive to sort of start pillaging his house, and as they're climbing in with rope ladders,
Hmm.
Raja Jugal Kishore manages to find the main person who's leading them and say, look, hold on, hold on, hold on. Here are, 3,000 Asharfi. Now, an Asharfi is, a gold coin that weighs about like 10 grams. So it's a lot of gold. But, with that gold, he manages to make sure that not only his house, but also other people around him are protected. And he's not the only person to do this. So it's actually pretty clear, on the one hand, that both all of the elites of the city have managed to come to some kind of very quick understanding of Nadir Shah. It's a Qatl-e-Aam. So the idea really is it's a general massacre, but it's also a massacre of the Awam. It's not supposed to be a massacre of the elites. And at the same time, of course, Mughal elites do appear to also help participate in the massacre, which is a sort of interesting side note.
Because to date, when I go to Sunehri Masjid, the only thing of distinction that that Sunehri Masjid actually has is that Nadir Shah stood here and supervised the slaughter of the people. And I
Yeah.
think now, of course, it doesn't exist, but there used to be a darwaza called Khuni Darwaza because of that. But that
Mm-hmm.
darwaza has now collapsed. So it's no longer there. But those memories, as you said, are still here. The memories of Nadir Shah, the memories of his slaughter. And it's interesting that, as you say, that even today, it's always the ordinary people who suffer. It's never
Mm-hmm.
the the rich and the powerful get away with everything then
Absolutely.
as now.
Absolutely.
And another thing is that one theme in your book that's a constant theme is Daulat and Faiz, which you keep
Hmm.
talking about. So, when you're talking about sovereignty, in the discourse of sovereignty, you make the distinction that being loyal to the throne versus being loyal to the body of the king. That the people in Bengal were loyal to the throne, whereas the people of Delhi were loyal to the body of the king. So
Hmm.
again, this is something that you were just talking about earlier, but I want to understand what Daulat and Faiz mean,
Yeah.
as
So
you have
I
used
so,
it. Ah,
so I think so I was sort of really interested in the question of trying to understand what sovereignty. I mean, sovereignty is a very big word, and we use it all the time to talk about the Mughal Empire. So, I'm just very curious to understand what is this big word, which has a lot of connotations and meanings in a sort of European intellectual history. What does that actually have to do with something? And can we just sort of use the word sovereignty? Or, should we sort of try to think about what sovereignty might have meant to the Mughals from their own perspective? And so, when you read Mughal histories and ethical treatises from the 15th and the 16th and 17th centuries, you see that certain words and ideas repeat themselves intensely. And so, one word that I sort of chose, but that seems very, very significant, is this idea of daulat itself. So, it's interesting now, of course, in contemporary Urdu, daulat simply just means
mean,
wealth, right? But there is a kind of sense that it also means something else. So when we say मैं खुद बदौलत ऐसे किया है मैं अपने अपनी बदौलत किया है whatever. So there's a kind of sense that this word has some other meaning. Um, so another meaning of the word is fortune, obviously good fortune, daulat, yeah. But also under the Mughals, I think the idea of daulat itself gets infused with their Central Asian heritage. And the Central Asian heritage in particular is this idea of light. So, in the Mongol founding myth, light falls on the womb of the ancestor of the Mongols, Alan Kuwa. And because of this like heavenly light that comes from on high, she has these children who then go on to it. Now that same light, Abul Fazl tells us that same light actually fell on Akbar.
Akbar.
Right? So there's a kind of sense that these are rulers who are, these are rulers who are getting light from above. And this light, this sense of light becomes very important. If you look at Mughal paintings, for instance, they're all
Yes,
suffused
all
with light.
have those halos.
And halos, precisely. So that's really kind of sense. And, especially this idea, you always see like little angels who are pouring like stardust down on the ruler. So there really is a kind of sense that there's some special claiming. And I think that's why the imperial palace is called the Daulat Khana. That's why, as somebody just pointed out, Jahangir refers to Shah Jahan as Bedaulat when Shah Jahan rebels against him. And Shah Jahan probably doesn't like that because he really builds a kind of visual architecture of Daulat as far as I can tell. So these golden domes under which the king appears in the morning, if you're standing, and imagine you're standing by the banks of the Jamuna for your Jharuka Darshan, and it's the morning and it's like 6 a.m. and the sun is rising behind you. And then the trumpets blare and the music plays, and you see this little figure appear in the Jharuka under this shining golden roof. This idea of like light and heavenly approval is completely tied in. But so Daulat is the thing in a sense that gives the body, and I think there's clearly an idea that it sits inside the body of the ruler. So it's very clear that this is something that animates the ruler. But the ruler's job is also then to translate this Daulat and make it available to people. And I think that idea of making it available, translating this, is this idea of fairs, this idea of heavenly abundance, right? So the idea that the universe is expanding, that all things are available in plenitude in the universe through God's power, which means that, this is a world of resource infinity, not resource scarcity. And it's the job of the king, in sense, to make these resources available to the people. And obviously the most obvious form of that is food should be cheap, right? And again, I just want to point out that there are echoes of this in our contemporary culture, where if you think about the fact that governments used to fall on the price of onions, why? Because onions are supposedly the food that poor people eat.
Yes.
So there is this continuing idea that the government is actually fundamentally responsible for ensuring the conditions of life, plenitude, for ordinary people, right? For the low. And I think this, again, is a sort of refraction of the idea of fairness, which is already very clearly evident in the empire. Which is why all the markets are named after fairs also. So Fairs Bazaar, Nehre Fairs.
Fairs Nair and Fairs Bazaar, all of which I think if they were to see today, they would be quite anguished by what has happened to Fairs Nair today. It's just a
Absolutely.
block of concrete now, which
Absolutely. And
brings me.
we should talk about that. We should talk
Yes,
about how.
that is my next question because you talk about Delhi as a palimpsest of from which older images were never erased. And that is what has been the area of my study and where I have also done a lot
Mhm.
of research on. So,
Yes.
and Shah Jahan, you say, is an architectural expression of Shah Jahan, sorry, Shah Jahanabad is an architectural expression of Shah Jahan's discourse of sovereignty. And the principal features of the city represented in stone the values by which imperial rule claimed legitimacy. Do you see any parallels in modern day naming of architectural projects in the names of popular politicians, renaming of roads, or even in constructing statues and the new planned Central Vista? So these are two questions. You can take the first part and then the second.
Absolutely. I think, well, I think the first part of the question actually, Rana, you know better than I do. So I've actually, I think you should tell us, and you should tell our audience whether this makes, as somebody who knows the physical structure of Delhi inside out, I'm very curious as to whether
So
whether you do
yes,
think that it's a balance that,
so the
and whether that
first,
makes sense.
the
Yeah.
fifth city of Delhi, supposedly the supposed fifth city of Delhi, Firozabad, parts of it are included now in Shah Jahanabad. Say, for
Mm-hmm.
example, Sultan Ratia's tomb, Bulbuli
Mm-hmm.
Khana, the Turkman Shah's grave, as well as
Mm-hmm.
the Kala Masjid, and even that what is very famous today for people who go to Shah Jahanabad to eat chitli kabar. That's a
Mm-hmm.
14th century Sufi saint, Sayyid Roshan. So these are parts which were already present there, in which were incorporated into Shah Jahanabad, and the city just built around it. And
Mm-hmm.
the Faiz Nehar also had been initially built by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, which was later on repaired in the age of Akbar, and then Shah Jahan got it done again. So, of course, the whole of Delhi is a palimpsest. We are living on many layers of sedition of earlier cities and civilized cultures. So now let's come to the second part of the question. That everybody here is today here to hear you, Abhishek. They hear me very often. I speak a lot. I
Well,
think this is the first time you are on Insta Live, so we'll
sure,
keep it
sure,
to
sure,
you.
sure. But
Huh.
yeah, absolutely. So I think, look, I think that, I think that it's very natural for rulers who find themselves ambitious to try to make a mark on a capital city. In that sense, I think this little business of renaming roads, which is not something that the BJP started with, it's
No,
actually
it's been
started
done
before
for, I think, after
the
independence.
it's always after independence, it's been done.
Mm.
I'm always reminded of the fact that, only the metro calls it Rajiv Chowk, but every single other person in the city still calls it Connaught Place. And I think that, so there's a kind of durability to memory that official renaming cannot get rid of. Clearly renaming Aurangzeb Road is a kind of trivial political gesture that's simply designed to inflame communal passions, cause injury to a minority community, but it doesn't really have much greater significance other than that, right? And similarly, I think building Central Vista is a sort of, on the scale of Shah Jahan's ambition, it's clearly a trivial gesture. And so, if the Prime Minister were to listen to me, I would advise him to actually move the capital somewhere else and leave Delhi alone. Because,
That's a good
Delhi
idea.
already, Delhi already has enough history, right? And
Yes.
building a few ugly buildings on Central Vista will only invite negative comparisons to Shah Jahan.
Huh.
Right? And in fact, this is sort of important because Luckey's Delhi, whatever you think of it, looks nice. But Luckey's Delhi looks nice in comparison to Shah Jahanabad. But it only looks nice in comparison to Shah Jahanabad because Shah Jahanabad was destroyed, right? It was actively taken to pieces.
Yes.
But I think what your work has shown and what the work that I've tried to do and what a lot of other people have shown is that these were beautiful cities and they were designed to be beautiful and they were designed to be pleasurable by people who had a deep aesthetic sensibility and a sense that ordinary people should have access to beautiful urban spaces. So when you put a nehar that runs through your main street, on which there are shops on either side, you have really created one of the most beautiful boulevards in the world in the early modern period, in the 17th and the 18th century. And it seems that the lowering of our ambitions with regard to urban space is a sort of tragic consequence of colonialism and afterwards.
For me, every time I go into the Red Fort, and after having read Asaru Sanadid or even, Saire Manazil or any of the other books that describe the paintings of Mazhar Ali Khan, Ghulam Ali Khan, and before that, it's like a physical jolt when you go there and realize that more than half of it has been demolished. What we see is just a shadow of its former self. Just a few buildings are remaining. And when you research that Agra Fort, that Delhi Red Fort is twice the size of Agra Fort. And you go to Agra Fort, which is so thickly populated with buildings, and here you have just a few standalone. So then that is when you realize that what has happened to it. As I think it is one of the, I'm forgetting which one it was. The Fort of Delhi by one of these British writers, I'm forgetting. He talks of Hira Mahal being broken because he says it came in the way of the breeze coming to the barracks. So they break down a beautiful baradari made by Shah Jahan because it stopped the breeze from coming to the barracks, and the barracks themselves are pretty ugly anyway. So
absolutely, and I think again, I think both of us would agree on this idea that architecture really matters, right? I mean, it's a big ideological statement, and I think the kind of just vandalism inflicted on the Red Fort is a really purposeful, serious political gesture on the part of the British to show that they had completely destroyed the older political order, right? Let's remember that there were plans to break down the Jama Masjid and turn it into a cathedral, right? Turn it into a Christian church, which really was supposed to be an act of Christian supremacy. To demonstrate that the Muslims had been defeated and the Christians were now going to rule, right? Until the intervention of a Hindu bank, intriguingly, right? So I think going to the Red Fort, I'm always reminded of the violence of the mutiny and the profound counter-violence that it occasioned, right? It's like this real desire on the part of the English to absolutely destroy the possibility of any political order after 1857 in North India.
And not only the architectural building or political order, but even the social order, which is again something that you discuss. And I found that verse by Hunarwar Khan Aqil, where he talks of muss up your hair a little and slant your hat at a jaunty angle, for no reproachful gazes were to be encountered in India. Indeed, hatred and discord did not weigh upon hearts in this land, and no one troubled one another. And you go on to talk about the communal harmony, which is what has been my reading from my translations of 19th and 20th century Urdu accounts into City of My Heart, that people lived whatever they may have been earlier, or whether there was any communal discord or not. But in the 19th century, at least they are living very happily. And I think Hunarwar Aqil is from the 18th century.
Yes.
So 18th and 19th century, we have accounts of people saying that the communities are living together. So do you think Shah Jahanabad's cosmopolitan nature played a part in what you describe as lazat-e-zindagi of the town? And which you say is an explicit aim of the founding of the city and the provision of repose and pleasures of life for the king's subjects. So is that one of the reasons why the people were so attached to the body of the king? And how far did the king succeed, given that you also talk of the riots and the seamier side of the city too?
Yeah. Look, I think I think that, let's put it this way. I think that, this is an undeniable fact, and I think that we have to completely engage it at heart,
Yes.
which is that Delhi is an Islamic city, right? There is no pre-Islamic Delhi. Delhi is basically fundamentally a city that is shaped as a center of Islamic rule. What's important about Shah Jahan's city, and I'm sure it's true of the cities before Shah Jahan's city, but what's certainly important about Shah Jahanabad is that it's also meant for everyone, right? So the idea is not, the provision of fares is not limited to any one community. And in fact that you can actually provide abundance to a variety and a large number of communities is precisely the marker of your success.
Yes.
So for Shah Jahan's court panegyrists will say, well, forget Hindus and Muslims. We also have Europeans, we have Africans, we have Central Asian, we have Chinese, we have Iranians, we have Ottomans. All of these people live in India. They learn our languages. They're practicing their wares and they're making money, right? So there's a kind of sense that the city works and the empire works because lots of different communities are enjoying the city together. And so this is particularly true. I don't think it's in the book necessarily, but when you read accounts of the Shahi Hammam in Delhi, which is the big hammam, longer extent, and lots of people will actually talk about what a wonderful hammam it is and how nice it is to go there and see all of these people from different places who are in the hammam at the same time. So there really is a kind of sense of shared urban pleasure. And of course, if you just think about the fact that the Bagh next to the garden that is next to Chandni Chowk or Moonlight Avenue, as I call it in the book, is one of the largest gardens in any city in the world in the early modern period. I mean, it's like Central Park in New York City, a massive garden. And it really exists for popular pleasure. So you can see, in a sense, of course, I think that the Mughal Empire is possibly the most successful Indian political regime in a sense of providing for its people in a certain kind of sense. This is not to discount communal violence, right? I mean, we understand that there is communal violence in the pre-modern period. There's a lot of violence in general in the pre-modern period, right? So people are routinely stabbing each other in the streets for a perceived insult or a small slight, right? Everybody, to be a man in the 17th and the 18th centuries, to be an honorable man with izzat, is to always carry a jandhar or a katana on you at all times. And, the slightest insult from a lifelong friend can result in you stabbing him. And we see this all the time from the city. So nobody is saying that this is not like a really violent pre-modern society. Of course it is. And in that sense, communal violence is one form of violence that is definitely visible in the city. What's more important, and I think much more important than communal violence, is the philosophical engagement with the other religious tradition that is deeply visible at all levels of Mughal society. So to be a cultured Mughal subject, Hindu or Muslim, is not only to know your own religious tradition, but it is to have a real appreciation and conversation with the religious tradition that you do not belong to. So I think Supriya Gandhi, in her new book on Dara Shikoh, extremely beautifully, what Dara Shikoh is really doing is participating in a debate that is, in a sense, already taking place in society, which simply means that if you're a Muslim, you actually have a really fine-grained and thorough understanding of Hinduism, and you're trying to figure out, how do these two things work together? And the same thing works for all Hindus, right? So it's an important point that every time you open a manuscript that is written in the 17th or the 18th centuries, frequently they'll be written by somebody whose name is Ram Das or Lal Ram or, a Hindu name. But all of those manuscripts always begin with the Bismillah. Right? So, we should think seriously about what it means for a Hindu scribe to begin a manuscript in the name of Allah. And what it simply means is that there really is not the kind of sense of division between communities and these sharp communal markers that we now take for granted really do not exist in the pre-modern period.
And that is an aspect that needs to be explored more and more, especially today in today's India. And we need to talk about that, discuss that these were not, like in that book, Dilli Ka Aakhri Deedar, there is this lady, it's written I think in 1930, and he says, I've written it on based on accounts by my father and grandfather. And there is this lady there, Agai Begum, who says, आजकल बात बात पे दंगा हो जाता है, पहले हम लोग बहुत प्यार और मोहब्बत से रहते थे. And she's talking between communities. She's not talking about just one family or one community. She's saying कि हम लोग ईद भारत में लाभ भी करते थे और ईद और होली पे एक दूसरे के घर जाते थे. आजकल बाहर निकलो तो लट्ठम लट्ठा हो जाती है. And this book, when he's talking about this, he's talking about after the fall of the Mughal Empire, and this old lady has survived that 1857, and about 30-40 years later she is retelling the story of Phulwalon ki Sair and how everybody, the Hindus and the Muslims, went together, offered the flowers at the dargah as well as the temple. So yes, as you said, violence did exist, but violence exists everywhere. It was not only communal violence. Communal violence was a part of it.
Right.
Which is what you've written in your book also.
Yeah. And I think, look, I think, communal violence in a sense is neither surprising nor particularly interesting, right? In the sense that obviously when you have social disorders, you can imagine that one axis of identification will sometimes be religion. Sometimes it might be caste. Sometimes it might be by neighborhood. Sometimes it might be by ethnicity. So that's not surprising. I think what's more important, and the thing to reiterate, is just that it's not merely enough to say, I think that, we used to get along. Because also, fine, there were also fights. The point is that we had an intellectual tradition of engaging across religions. And I think that's what we need to bring back, right? I think that if there's something that has to be reconstructed, it really is this idea of seriously looking at the religious beliefs of other people and saying, I can learn from this.
That is how I was brought up. And I think people of my generation were brought up to know about each other's religion, respect and participate. And today, when I use the word Ganga Jamni, I'm abused that there's no such thing. And you are living in some kind of utopia. But that is the life that I lived and the life I grew up in, and in which I still have very firm belief. And I don't think it's going away anyway. Yes, it's under threat, but inshallah it should come back. Which brings...
sorry, go ahead.
No, I said which brings me to my next question, that if Shah Jahan's remaking of Delhi and the commercial vitality of his fairs that animated it produced a Mughal people, then it is Aurangzeb's enunciation of sovereignty that gave them their tongue as liable to launch into scornful insult as humble supplication. I'm quoting from your book, and that's why I'm reading it, because I do not want to make a mess of your beautifully written lines. And then you talk of Zattali again, who's become very popular here. So can you just make us understand, help us understand this sentence as well, and then later on talk about Zattali and that other poet that you've discussed?
Yeah, so I think, I think that, there are many ways to think about Aurangzeb, and I think we need a lot more work on Aurangzeb, who's a really important ruler. But I think one of the things that Aurangzeb does, which is a really sort of major intervention, perhaps his most important intervention, is to make justice bureaucratic rather than personal, right? So, until Shah Jahan's reign, more or less, although with, increasing tendencies towards bureaucratization, but still very strongly this idea that there is something in the ruler's body that makes him personally connected to heaven and gives you justice from wahan se upar se aata hai, right? This idea. And Aurangzeb also agrees. He also believes that the justice that he dispenses is heavenly. But if you look at portraits of Aurangzeb, in all portraits of Aurangzeb, you see an old man who is stooped over a book. And so it's very clear that the source of his authority is actually the word of God, rather than this mystical substance above, right? And so the idea for Aurangzeb, I think, is to create a new sort of legal regime that will encompass as much of the empire as possible, where he is not personally responsible for justice, but it is actually judges who will now get unprecedented new kinds of power. Aurangzeb, invents new kinds of judicial officials. He creates a new bureaucratic regime. This is possible because India is a really rich empire, right? So there are a lot of financial and physical resources available to him. He has a legal system that is already available to him. It exists. It's called Sharia, right? It's existed in India for a long time. And so for him, we should really see him, I think, as a legalizer, as somebody who is creating a kind of legal regime. And this is again true all over the world, right? So this is precisely the time in the 17th century, in the mid 17th century, that legal regimes really begin to take off in European places, right? 100 years before this, a similar legal regime is created in the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so the point about legalization, this particular form of inflicting legal rules, is that nobody really likes it, right? So the nobility don't like it because they find that they are suddenly being made responsible to some upstart, jumped up Qazi. And why should an elite nobleman listen to some Qazi who's been appointed to Aurangzeb? And ordinary people, on the one hand, don't particularly like it because they still expect to get justice from the king. And, under Aurangzeb, they still do. It still does happen. But in creating this infrastructure, Aurangzeb also empowers new classes of people. So, this infrastructure involves things like the creation of madrasas, seminaries across the empire. Stipends are given to students, right? The Fatwa-e-Alamgiri, this massive legal compendium, is produced. What this does is it empowers new groups of people. You now have new people who otherwise maybe not have these big legal training, are now actually getting legal training and are now beginning to say, well, I also know the law. So it's not just you who will tell you the law is, but I also know the law. I don't think this is what Aurangzeb intended. I don't think he expected these humble, low-caste Muslims of Lahore and Delhi and Ahmedabad and Surat to one day suddenly start saying, no, you're not the only expert. We're also, we also have views about this. We know what is right and wrong also. But what's also very clear is that this is a world that is expanded where Aurangzeb will actually be mocked, right? So people make fun of it. And Zatalli is, of course, the classical example because we know that he had some really brutal, and I left the really good stuff out of the book, Rana. We know that he has like brutal. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. There was an interruption because I got a phone call. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. So anyway, so we know, so it's also very clear that people, mock Aurangzeb for his religious pretensions. So one of the things that Zatalli does is he just makes up gibberish Arabic sounding words. And he just sort of assigns them to Aurangzeb. And so he says, so a woman went to Aurangzeb and said, give me justice. And Aurangzeb said, this is some nonsense phrase in a language that sounds like Arabic, but is not Arabic. And it's really funny to read, especially because he uses Hindi galis or Hindi curse words and just works them in. So it's also very clear that people are actually making, making attacks on Aurangzeb for his views. And this actually shows you the development of a kind of society that is now grown beyond the control of the imperial center, right? And Aurangzeb knows this. He knows this because we know that when he encounters sappers who personally make fun of him and say, you're a bad ruler, you're fighting a pointless war in the Deccan, you're not a good Muslim, you don't really know Islam as well as you think you know Islam, Aurangzeb doesn't actually take any action against them. And he vents his frustration and he says, look, I wish I could kill this guy. But if I kill him, people would only recite his verses more. So it's more important to just grin and bear.
That's actually a very good lesson also. And when I was reading this part of your book, and I was reminded, and I was just thinking of the Indian coffee house and the intellectual discussion that took place during the freedom movement. And right up, I think, till the 90s and when I was growing up, and I think 90s and early part of the 21st century, we had a very robust culture of political criticism and people sitting in these Indian coffee houses and talking about it and discussing everything under the sun. And that is what I was reminded of when I read Zattali and Ali, and when you were talking about the kind of atmosphere that prevailed in Delhi at that time. And something, because today Shahjahanabad has become just a commercial hub where people go either to do wedding shopping or they go to eat. So I think they've forgotten कि यहाँ पे पहले कहवा खाने थे, and there were, as you said, one of the most beautiful boulevards in the world with so many coffee houses and things like that. So can you just describe a little bit of the intellectual discussions that would have taken place in Shah Jahanabad at that point of time, say between people sitting there? Uh,
If you were at a coffee house in Delhi in the early 18th century, I think, three or four things would be happening, right?
yes.
One, I think there would be what Mughal writers call gup.
Okay.
Gup, mane gupshup.
Haan,
This is our
gupshup.
word gupshup, right?
Haan,
So
haan.
this idea of just, gup is a word that the Mughals actually use. So there's a kind of like conversation. Yeah, somebody here says exactly what we do at Forest. It is the new coffee house. And I have to agree. I think, yeah, Forest does capture some of that. But, so gup would be one major component. Then I think another component would be shire, right? So I think that coffee houses are performance spaces that are sort of like serious performance spaces where if you're a shire and everybody's a shire and everybody's writing poetry all the time, this is where you actually stand up and maybe you recite a few verses to some of your friends. This is also a place, I think, where people recite longer poems than just little ghazals. So I have one account in my book. It's quite hard to reconstruct actually what happens in these sorts of places. So you have to forgive me for my lack of precision here. But I think people also recite long poems. So I have one account of a very long poem that somebody recites in the early 18th century, and maybe he recites it at a coffee house in there. But it's a poem that actually is a description of the entire geography of India. It's a description of the history of India. It's a description of recent politics. And it even ends with a kind of account of the total. So I think this is one of those places where people actually get a sense of the space and the world in, right? So there's that. Then, of course, you have the question of the presence of religious people. So we know that, there are all of these like little takiyas and like little sites, including on Chandni Chowk, where various religious people would sort of like settle and make themselves available. Then you have the special category of person called the nakkal, right? Or the mime. And the nakkal is probably making jokes, and he's probably imitating other people or other kinds of people. And he's probably reciting satirical poetry that is critical of whatever the king or whatever nobleman is. A French traveler, or maybe it's an English traveler from the 17th or the 18th century says, what happens in European coffee houses happens at the halwai ki dukaan in India, right? So it's the shop of the halwai where you actually, or the confectioner, where you really have big conversations, political conversations happen. But I think that also probably happened at the coffee houses in Delhi. So I think these are probably the range of things that happen. I think for the more serious literary conversations, possibly happened at coffee houses, but maybe they also happened in the gardens of the well-to-do and the rich, of the privileged, in their own houses with their own wine, sort of separate from this urban street culture.
Even today, in a small city like not a small city, but say in a city like Lucknow or Allahabad, if you go to a halwai shop early in the morning to buy samosa jalebi, you will find a lot of people standing there and discussing the daily news. They'll all have newspapers in their hand. And so we've had this political culture forever where people talk whatever they talk about, but they'll have the newspaper, they'll be sitting there, they'll be reading that, and they'll sit and discuss. Even in villages where I've gone, I've seen people sitting around a halwai shop, chai shop, and sitting and discussing the day's news or whatever they've read, either heard on the radio or in newspapers. So that culture still continues. And
absolutely.
Another and in fact, that chapter of yours on the poetry and Aurangzeb, I found that extremely fascinating. So all those who are hearing, Abhishek's book is out in the stores. Please do buy it, The King and the People. So just let me show this. And this cover is beautiful. So how did you, because people kept asking me, where is this painting from? And then I later discovered it's from the Louvre, but I had never seen it. And I think I've seen almost all, I see so many paintings of the Red Fort, but this is the Jama Masjid. I think Farooq Siyar, Farooq Siyar going for the Eid Ramaz.
Going for Friday prayers.
Friday prayers. Okay. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
cover is gorgeous. And before I come to the next question, because I will forget, I have a very forgetful memory now. What does your Twitter handle Zurtalab mean? I tried to search for the meaning. I could not find it. I said, well, okay, I'll ask you. What does that mean?
Well, this is a word that I imagine probably comes up at some point at Aligarh in the Mughal history seminar, because Zortalab is the technical definition for rebellious zamindars, right?
Okay, I
So
didn't know that.
Zor Talab means people from whom you
Okay,
talab, you take
Zor
by Zor.
Talab. Okay,
Zor
Zor
Talab,
Talab.
right?
I read
So,
it as Zur Talab, so I couldn't figure out कि
yeah,
फिर ये Zur Talab क्या होता है?
I
Zor
know,
Talab, yeah.
sadly, it turned out that Zor Talab with an O was already taken, so I had to
Yeah.
use the Persian pronunciation.
Okay, okay. So that solves that mystery because I've been fascinated by your handle ever since. So, and to come to a more serious question, and during famine in 1713, a preacher at the Congregational Mosque, where the emperor went to offer Eid prayer, threw a sheaf of questions from God creations in front of Farrukhsiyar. The kings of the day are the givers of daily bread. If you want your portion of heaven, don't be parsimonious with their portion. The king immediately signed an approval of these petitions, and I'm reading from his book. So, can you talk us through the holy riots, the shoemakers' riots, and the court's responsiveness to protest, emergence of common people as political subjects, and the uprising, which you say the I'm messing up the date here, I think 1760 somewhere, an uprising that you say has been broadly overlooked by modern historians.
Yeah. So I think, look, in general, I think most urban uprisings in the Mughal Empire have been overlooked by historians. But, I'll just say this. I think that for a set of fairly complicated reasons, people by the early 18th century, some of which we've talked about today, people by the early 18th century really developed a kind of political sensibility and a kind of political engagement with the king. So they start, in a sense, if you think of the 17th century as the king is speaking to the people, in the 18th century, it feels like the people are speaking back to the king. And they're speaking more loudly and more frequently. And I think that these protests catch the people by surprise. So, if you think of Shah Jahan's Jama Masjid, and you think of Shah Jahan going for namaz at the Jama Masjid, I don't think Shah Jahan really has built this mosque so that ordinary people can come and give him requests. From his paintings, it really looks like a highly controlled, stylized space, a kind of ritual theater of imperial practice. Something is clearly changed by the 1713-14 period, where Farrukhsiyar, the Mughal emperor, goes to the fort, goes for prayers. And he's actually approached by some guy who gives him a bunch of papers and says, look, so-and-so wants this, so-and-so wants this, so-and-so's complaining that, there isn't enough food in the market. What are you going to do about it? That's your job. And the king is sort of shocked, and then he does it. So that's a kind of shift in Mughal society that has clearly taken place. More generally, one of the things that happens is that it's pretty clear that, people are willing to sort of use force to express themselves. So now that we're in the US, there's a lot of discussion. People quote Martin Luther King
Yes.
Over the recent riots when they say the riot is the language of the unheard, right? And so the idea is that one of the reasons for the big riots in the US is because a significant proportion of the population has a complaint that is not being addressed by the legal means that exist to actually address those things. And I think in some Mughal riots also work in exactly the same way, right? These are some of them, not all of them, but some of them are riots of the unheard. So, for instance, what happens if a poor person gets into a fight with a rich person? Well, it turns out the rich person always wins. Except by the early 18th century, you now have these new people who are much more well-versed in the law, who are much more forceful, who in a sense really believe that they have a kind of direct engagement with the king. And so now for the first time, you begin to see a kind of pushback, and people actually say no. Live up to your formal promises. You promised justice, but what we have is injustice. And so until we get the justice that you exist to give us, we are not going to let things go. This kind of new assertiveness really seems to be a striking feature of the empire in the period. And I think that Mughal elites react to this with a kind of horror. Right? They don't like it. They're not expecting it. They don't want it. From their perspective, it just looks completely barbaric, and they want it to end and stop. They don't even want to talk about it. Nevertheless, there is a kind of ferment on the streets, which is doing something different.
There is, actually, for the benefit of all the people who are watching, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left, but we will come back again to take all your questions. There are 2 questions by Neha. One is, can you talk about Aurangzeb's engagement with Hanafi law? And the second is, was fatwa a symbolic act of his personal piety, as Goenthar and others suggest?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, this is getting a little technical, but yeah, I don't think that it's an act of personal piety at all, right? I mean, it's a very strange act of personal piety to put together a legal compendium. And I think, when you commission a large number of scholars to get together and put together, 8 books that are like, I mean, I just zoom out to show you how wide the fatwa is, a massive text, right? You put that kind of text together, basically, I think, as a kind of general set of statements about how to administer legally, right?
So we've got 2 minutes left, but we will be back. Just the last question before we go off and come back again is, Kaustab is asking, what about the influence of the foreigners, Abhishek, that would have also seeped into the coffee house conversations?
Yeah. Hi, Kaustab. Thanks for coming. Good to see you virtually. I think that there really is a kind of receptiveness to Europeans, a kind of like fascination with Europeans. And I think it shows, there's such a thing as a Pirangipura outside of Delhi, which exists. So there's a sort of like European, there's a kind of sort of European enclave which is present. And I think that, lots of art marks the engagement of a kind of fascination with Europeans that's sort of visible across the line. And there are lots of Europeans who are sort of floating around the city in the late 17th and the early 18th century. A lot of them are people who work in the Mughal artillery, for instance, probably all kinds of other people too. And we only know a fraction of them. So I think, yeah, there is a sort of great receptiveness and interest in them. But there is no sense, I think, in the 1720s or 30s that, in 20 or 30 years, the English are going to go on to become the main colonial power in South Asia. Nobody in Delhi expects that.
Okay, we are about to go off, but we are going to come back. Supriya is also here. Hi, Supriya.
Hi, Supriya.
And the next session, Abhishek, you have to talk about what are the sources that you used for your book, since official Mughal histories do not write a lot about the common subjects of the empire. This is from Shreya Gupta. So we
I mean, if you look through the bibliography, you'll just see a really sort of wide range of different kinds of sources.
Yes, I have seen that. So sorry for the interruption. That is something we can't help because we get only 1 hour. This limitation of 1 hour is a big problem here. Abhishek is back, so we just go live with him. But I prefer, this limitation of 1 hour is a problem in Instagram. But I prefer Instagram to Facebook because everybody can join here, and I find the viewers here are far more informed than the one on Facebook or on Twitter. So that, and I get trolled so much on Twitter that I prefer this space here. And I have wonderful, whenever I have done Insta Live, and I do quite a bit of them, I found wonderful engagement with people. So everybody who wants had typed their questions, you can retype them. Until then, I have one question.
Hi, Tanya.
Abhishek, and that is, what lessons would you like your modern readers? The voice isn't coming clearly, mine or Abhishek's? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So what lessons would you like your modern readers to heed from your book?
I don't think that the job of historians is to provide lessons for modern readers. Yeah, I think that we offer accounts of the past that should hopefully make it more complicated for you to understand the present. Right? I mean, so my job is to basically complicate your understanding of the present. My job is not to tell you, what to do or how to do whatever. I mean, I'm making one kind of argument or a set of arguments about the past. And really, it's up to you to do with it what you want or do nothing. It doesn't matter. That's the job of the academic historian, as far as I can tell. So no lessons.
That's a very good point, and I hope people do read it and do take something from this, even if it's. Shreya is here again with since she's come back with the same question. What are the sources you use? Yes. So I have the book here with the sources, but I don't think she has the book. So can you just tell her a little bit?
So I use a very wide variety of Persian manuscripts and published sources that range from letters, collections of letters, newspapers, akhbarat as they're called, histories, poetry collections, so-called collections of little texts and essays, just really all kinds of things. And I'm just sort of reading quite widely in them, looking for little traces of where people talk about what's happening on the street.
And you've used.
Sorry.
I said you've used a whole variety of sources in the book. And my question would be, how long did it take you to write this? This is also your dissertation, isn't it?
This was a project that really began before I knew anything. So even before I knew Farsi, I was sort of interested in the question. So I think it's a project that began in 2008. And then I think, I finished writing a long dissertation in 2013, 2014. And then I was very fortunate to actually have a big, long stretch of leave. So I think leave for historians who are academics, who are working, is just really makes a big difference. And so I had a few years of leave when I was able to just read more widely, look through all of the sources that one had collected, rethink my ideas, have the opportunity to have serious conversations with historians, including, especially historians of Europe, of China, of the Ottoman Empire, of the US. I'm really fortunate and privileged to be in a department with really fantastic historians from other places who don't know anything about India, but have really good questions to ask. I'm glad to see Noor Microfilm has joined because I got a lot of important sources first at Noor Microfilm many years ago, about 10 years ago. And so it's wonderful to see Delhi present. But anyway, so I think the process of the book writing was that I wrote many drafts and I wrote it sort of over and over again with a lot of feedback. So the book that you see before you is, I know its imperfections and I know that it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it would otherwise have been had I not got time, lots of time.
It's a wonderful book and I really, really loved it. I loved reading through it. And I said, for me, knowing about the people who lived in the buildings or the monuments that I go to, that is a very special feeling to be able to know that, okay, I know a bit about, of course, the monarchs and the rulers and the nobles who built it. That is something I work with. But the people and, that one description that we just talked about in the earlier session about that any qazi or any imam can come and just throw a bunch of papers at the king and say that, what are you going to do about it? That is and that's a question somebody has asked. Was the Mughal king very accessible? Were the Mughal emperors accessible to the public?
Well, in theory, they're supposed to be accessible, right? I mean, so Mughal theory, political theory from on high says that kings should be accessible, right? So why is it, for instance, that Jahangir has all of these paintings painted of himself holding, with these golden chains of bells that link heaven to earth? Well, it's a Sasanian tradition. The Sasanians are Iranian rulers about 1,000 years before the Mughals are around, but they're sort of famous for their justice. And under Jahangir, this idea really gets picked up. And so Jahangir, makes it very clear that, when you go to Agra, the guide will tell you this is where they used to have this bell, this chain of bells that let you access the emperor. And that's not actually fiction. I mean, that was a kind of like symbolic practice. I don't know how effectively it worked, but it's pretty clear that the Mughal emperors believed that they were or should be responsible to people and responsive to their complaints.
And we discussed this in the earlier session also. And another very interesting thing in your book is that you write even Delhi's criminals were spectacular. I'm sorry. Sometimes I just can't. I start tripping on the word. Spectacularly wealthy. And when the famed thief Kanan, you talk about him that when he's apprehended in 1722, 20,000 rupees in cash besides stolen goods were recovered from his house. That's a fortune, 20,000 rupees in 1722. So,
I mean, 20,000 rupees is a fortune in 2022. So,
yes.
it's it's not a it's and given that you could get quite a few kilograms of you could get like what 8, 9, 10 kilograms of rice for a rupee in the day.
In 1930, 10 tolas of gold were 34 rupees.
Right.
So you could have probably got many kgs of gold in that that money at that point of time.
Yeah, I mean a rupee in Shah Jahan's Delhi is 12.5 grams of silver.
So somebody's asked about the book. Here's the book, The King and the People. And I'll be posting that again. You can see it, whoever it is who has asked about that. So that is again, these things that, these small things which catch my, that you've written about it, which I found very interesting. And also you've talked a lot about the Chandni Chowk and the Lazzat-e-Zindagi. So I think we can, if anybody has any questions, we'll take them. Otherwise, we'll end it after this. We'll just talk a little bit more about the Lazzat-e-Zindagi of Shah Jahanabad.
Yeah.
So
just wondering, is Supriya still with us?
I don't know. She was there earlier. She
just had the Supriya's Supriya Gandhi's book was also I wish I'd had the chance to see it before my own book came out, but she also has wonderful accounts of Dara Shikol's work at his massive mansion in Delhi in the mid 17th century. Hi Tanya.
And that mansion is now in Tata. It's it's just a part of it remains. It's very, very in a very bad condition. I went there when I was writing about the mansion itself. I was writing for one of my Hindu columns, and when I went there, at the back they've now replaced all the old columns and the Mughal columns. Those have been replaced by modern day columns. The whole house is hanging with cobwebs, and there was a ASI museum there, which is, I think, being redone. I don't know what the latest state is, but I went there about a year ago, and I felt scared to go inside. That is the state of that Dara, and now it's just reduced to being called Dara Shiko's library. So it's inside this Ambedkar University, but even then it's not very well looked after. So.
Yeah,
I think the Supriya might have left, but
but to your older point, I think we have to be much more ambitious when it comes to our built heritage, right? And I think that.
Hello, Kashif, how are you? Somebody wants you to suggest a book on the whole Mughal period.
There are a lot of books. Richard Eaton has a new book on Persian in India, which looks really interesting. J.F. Richards' classic book is a good, useful beginning overview. I mean, there's a lot out there that's accessible and good. Yeah.
Salsabil is now on Twitter. This is a little girl that I met last year when I'd gone to Cambridge, Kashif's daughter, Salsabil. So she says it is Salsabil. Hi, Salsabil, how are you? So she's using her father's Instagram account, apparently. So anyway, anything else you'd like to what's your, Acha, Kashif is there also. I was wondering how Salsabil is there all alone. What's your new project now?
I'm working on it. I'm thinking about it. I have a couple of little essays. I have a couple of little things that I want to sort of finish writing in the near future. And I think I'll probably end up doing something on Mughal Bengal in the early 18th century. So I think I'll probably get out of Delhi for like a little bit, go to Bengal.
I think that is much needed because, yes, I was talking to these people, they were here earlier. There is this Jain family who has a palace in near Kasim Bazar. Or, no, sorry, in Bada Bazar, I think. And they've turned it into a heritage hotel called Badi Koti. They were saying, not much work is being done on 18th and 19th century Bengal, especially the Nawabs of Murshidabad, that period. So I'm glad that you're going there. How do you feel about the rewriting? Rachita is asking, the Mughal history is the most visible history, food, language, music, and more. How do you feel about the rewriting?
What do you mean, how do I feel about the rewriting?
The rewriting of history, the WhatsApp University project.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think, look, universities are really great places, right? Because universities give sanctuary to academics, right? So I don't really care what the government of India does and what the BJP IT cell does. My job, in a sense, is to provide intellectual resources for people in India, right? So my job is to have this conversation, right? And those who want to listen are welcome to listen. Rewriting history is obviously a terrible thing to do. But I think the only consequence of rewriting history is actually not that the history is lost, because it won't be lost. But I think that what rewriting history does is it just produces, a less informed population, right? So by any standards, it's not good for people if the history is rewritten. It's not going to make any difference to historians, and it's not going to make any difference to the actual history as it continues to be practiced in universities. So I think that, it's on people to read history, and it's on people to engage with it, and it's on people to take it on in its complexity. And when they read that history, they might frequently find things that they don't like in it, or are disturbing, or don't agree with their political beliefs. And I think then it's very important to realize and to draw a line and say, when we're talking about the 18th century or the 10th century or the 5th century, we're not talking about the present, and we're not talking about the Republic of India. So, we have to figure out how we want to live in this world today together according to our shared values and beliefs. And we have to recognize that the past had different values and beliefs, and to sort of take those on and engage them. I think, trying to not engage them or trying to pretend that, Akbar didn't win this battle, but somebody else won this battle. These kinds of like little gymnastics are silly more than anything. They're just sort of silly and pointless.
I think that's a wonderful adjective to use for all the shenanigans. And I also feel that, it's our job to just keep writing and putting it out there. Someday somebody is going to come back and read it and maybe correct their distorted version of what they've been reading over WhatsApp. Because she says, that's how I teach history to my children. Being a mother, they need to know more than a linear textbook history. Yes, it's up to us, as we talked about it, that we have to talk about our shared values to our children and to bring them up in that culture of pluralism.
Yeah, and I just want to add that I think, Rana, in this context, the work that you do is really important. Your work has made Delhi's history accessible and interesting to a large population of people who would never have otherwise encountered it. 20 years ago, there was no sense of a public interest in Delhi's heritage and history when I left India. That did not really exist. It exists now, and you've done a lot for it.
Thank you so much.
I think this is really important, right? So there is the work of what I do, which is what I do. But I think what you do in a sense is even more important, right? Because making history available as a lived experience and resource for people is sort of a basic human right. I mean, in a sense, if you don't know your past, if you live like an amnesia, if you walk on a street and you don't know anything about how and where you are and what the place has been, it means you're missing a part of yourself, right? And so I think that urban history and the history of the city, the history of Delhi, to make Delhi actually available in its like richness to the people who live there today, and to show them that many other forms of life are possible, is possibly the most important form of public history. I mean, let me just say, I'm a big believer in public history. That's what it is.
Thank you. And we just one more question. I think we'll take this will be the last. Kashif is asking, do you think there is too much focus on battles and conflicts than what else was going on day to day in our past?
Sure, absolutely. And the reason there's a lot of focus on battles and conflicts is because most histories are written about battles and conflicts, right? So if you read the histories and you simply rewrite what's in them, you'll end up talking a lot about battles and conflicts. Now, we should also take battles and conflicts seriously as historians. And I think sometimes we just sort of talk about them and describe them. We don't really take them seriously. And to take them seriously, I simply mean that, getting into a fight and saying, I might die in the course of this fight or this cause is a sort of really important cultural and political statement. So to really take battle history seriously would be to say, let's look at the commitments and the reasons that people are willing to risk their lives to do things. And I think that's important. So I think we do need to continue to study the history of warfare because it's a fundamental human activity that people have always and apparently will always continue to engage in. But I think we need to think about it in terms of motivations and behaviors rather than in, winners and losers.
Yes. As you've put it so well, so I don't think I need to say anything more about that. And thank you so much, Abhishek, for coming, and all the best for the future for you and your family. Really and those who have joined us, once again, I'll just show you the book. This is a book by it's published by OUP, The King and the People, Sovereignty and Popular Politics in Mughal India. So you can go and get this, and you should, and we'll be talking more. I think maybe in a month or so we'll come back. Abhishek and I will be talking for maybe one of TCN or one of the other platforms. But for now, thank you and all the best.
Thank you, Rana, and it was really wonderful to chat with you. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation in Delhi.
Inshallah. We'll look forward to that. Thank you. And thank you everybody who joined us.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.